Did you just double dip that chip? Excuse me? You double dipped the chip. Double dipped? What are you talking about? You dipped the chip, you took a bite, and you dipped again.
So the double dip, made infamous by the Seinfeld episode where George got caught double dipping at his girlfriend's wake. The question is it just an objectionable habit, or is it there actually transfer of bacteria from the bitten cracker to the dip? We ran an experiment to determine that, and we're going to talk about today. We're going to call this series of videos, Did You Just Eat That? My name is Paul Dawson. It's also a title of a book I wrote with my co-author, Brian Sheldon. But today, we're going to talk about the double dip. So what do? Talk about the experiment we ran. We dipped 3 crackers that had been bitten in chocolate, salsa, chocolate, and cheese dip. We also dipped 3 crackers that had not been bitten in salsa, chocolate, and cheese in 3 separate bowls, and then analyzed the bacteria that was left in each of those different those bowls. So we call this an experiment because we ran 3 separate replications, we call them, on actually 3 different days using 3 different samples of the salsa, chocolate, and cheese, so we knew it wasn't just a one-time thing, and also had 8 different subjects do the experiment each time. So how do we enumerate the bacteria in this dip? Okay, here's a visual on how we count the bacteria that were in the dips. We took a sample from each dip and put it on a sterile petri dish, agar, you will, and then put that petri dish in an incubator or an oven, so to speak, and let it sit there for 24 hours. And that allowed each individual bacterial cell to grow into colonies that we could then count. Then we count those colonies on that dish and convert that back to the number of bacteria that were in the original sample that we removed from each of the dips.
So that's like putting your whole mouth right in the dip.
So what were the results? Well, the bacteria man on the skateboard and the arrows show us that when you bit a chip, there was a lot of transfer of bacteria, and when you didn't bite a chip, there was hardly any transfer of bacteria. The red arrows pointing out where the crackers that were not bitten, levels of bacteria in the dip. You see there, as I mentioned before, we ran this experiment. So we were able to run a statistical analysis. And so from a statistical analysis point of view, we had assigned letters to each mean. So if a letter's different, that means those means are significantly different. If they're not, the same letters appear, they're not different. We also have the CFU per mil. I mentioned the colonies. That is abbreviation for colony forming units per milliliter. It's kind of abbreviation for the number of bacteria there. So clearly when you bit a chip and dipped it, compared to when you didn't bite it, there was transfer of bacteria to the dip. Okay, now we know there's transfer of bacteria. There's some other food factors that contribute to the results. Here I have some arrows showing the difference between the dip, number of bacteria in the dip at 0 time when we first dipped, after we dipped, and then 2 hours later. So you see the big drop off in the number of bacteria in the salsa compared to the drop off for the chocolate, and then even there's not a significant change in the cheese dip after 2 hours. So this is due to the food factor, actually the pH or the acidity of the dip. So I mentioned the pH, food factor of the acidity. So let's talk about that. We see the pH scale here for different items you might be familiar with. Then we have on there tomatoes, which is the main ingredient in salsa, which is the pH of the salsa we used, pH of 4. pH of 5 was the pH of the chocolate, and the pH of 6 is the pH of the cheese. So the lower the pH, the more acid. And bacteria doesn't like acid. They don't survive well. They actually die off at high pH or low pH levels, high acid levels. And that little line there might be it's an interesting anecdote. The 4.6 is a food regulation cutoff point for what's called shelf-stable foods. So foods with a pH of below 4.6 are shelf stable, don't require refrigeration because the bacteria can't grow. So you walk through a grocery store and some of the foods that aren't refrigerated, oftentimes have this low pH. It makes them safe for shelf life and for safe to eat. Another interesting result, in addition to the drop off of bacteria after 2 hours, is the initial number of bacteria found in the 3 different dips. Clearly, with the arrows showing you salsa had significantly more bacteria than the chocolate and the cheese, and the chocolate and cheese were not different, but this was due to actually the thinness or the thickness, you could call it thickness of the dips. We call that viscosity. Okay, viscosity. Have a kind of a cartoon there. Viscometer actually measures the thickness or thinness of a fluid, and so with these sauces or dips, you can think about it. The thicker the sauce, like with chocolate and cheese, the less of the dip and along with it saliva falls back in the bowl. And we have a little clip here kind of showing that as a visual. The results showed that the salsa had a greater transfer of bacteria than the chocolate and cheese. And I talked about the viscosity and how the thickness of the dip. And we're going to visually show you how that effect there. So if you dip a chip into the salsa, falls back in the bowl. If you bit in the chip, bacteria falls back in there with it. Whereas with the chocolate, we dip the chocolate and hardly anything falls back in the bowl. It sticks to the chip. The dip sticks to the chip. And finally cheese. Similar thing. We see that cheese dip sticks to the dip and we have no bacteria fall back in the bowl in that case. Yeah, the chocolate looks pretty good. Let's try that chocolate and chips. Pretty good. So, what are our conclusions? Well, first of all, there's a lot of bacteria in the mouth. About 20 billion bacteria can be found in the oral cavity. Oral cavity is can be a source of pathogens. CDC tells us that there can be 5 infectious diseases spread by saliva. And we saw that if you bit a cracker and dipped it, there was a transfer of oral bacteria. Then I have there Typhoid Mary, using that as an example because Typhoid Mary was an Irish immigrant, and in the early 1900s she was a cook for people on the Long Island, cooking for a family, and that kind of started an investigation because during that period 6 of 11 people in the household she was cooking came down with typhoid. Turns out she was a carrier of Salmonella typhus, and that is and she did not exhibit any overt symptoms of that. She is an asymptomatic carrier, so that would indicate that someone at a party doesn't have to be coughing and sneezing to be carrying a illness or something can be contagious. It could be in the dip. That kind of concludes our covering of double dipping. We're just kind of summing that up. If you're at a party and people are double dipping and you're consuming that dip, it's kind of like you're kissing everybody who's double dipping at the party. So we'll wrap this double dipping and we'll call this, and we'll do some other food. We'll call them food peculiarities, some things we'll cover in the future. A 5-second rule, you drop food, pick it up quickly enough. Is there transfer? We know there is, but we did other factors like the food, type of food, and also the surface it was dropped on, how long the bacteria was there. Beer pong, a popular game played at tailgating events. Is there transfer of the ping pong ball into the beer? Restaurant menus, people handle restaurant menus. Or is there transfer from the hands to the menu and vice versa, back from the menu to your hands? Blowing out birthday candles, we just covered that there is bacteria transfer by saliva when you talk and blow and cough and sneeze. There's bioaerosols, so are they ending up on top of the cake when you blow birthday candles out? And then another is sharing food. Got popcorn here. When you stick your hand in a bag of popcorn, put the popcorn in your mouth and go back in for another handful. Are you transferring bacteria to the popcorn? Hope to see you soon. That wraps it up, and see you later.
From now on, when you take a chip, just take one dip and end it. Well, I'm sorry, Timmy, but I don't dip that way. How you don't, huh? No. You dip the way you want to dip. I'll dip the way I want to dip. Give me the chip! Hey!